Our story today begins not with a name carved in stone or a flag waving in the wind, but with trees, endless, whispering forests. The kind where sunlight filters like smoke through tall oaks and firs, where the ground is soft with moss and needles, where ancient winds once carried the scent of resin and fire. This is Germania, before borders, before kings, before the world knew what Germany would one day become. We're in the heart of Central Europe, thousands of years ago. The people here do not speak Latin or write in books. They live in wooden huts near rivers and glacial lakes. They worship the trees, the storms, and the sun. Each tribe holds its own customs, but all know the rhythm of the land, the harsh winters. The wild boar hunts, the reverent silence after a snowfall. The Celts pass through here. So do the Illyrians. But it's the Germanic tribes, scattered, independent, proud, that leave the most lasting mark. Names like the Swabi, the Carusi, the Chatti, and the Marcomanni flicker like firelight in ancient scrolls, written not by their hands, but by the Romans. Because eventually, the forest is no longer silent. In the 1st century BCE, Roman legions pushed northward, bringing their stone roads, their laws, and their ambitions. Julius Caesar writes of the Germani tribes fierce and free, living beyond the Rhine, unruled and untamed. Rome calls the land dangerous, a wilderness of warriors. They try to conquer it. And in 09 CE, in the dense Teutoburg forest, 3 Roman legions are ambushed and utterly destroyed. It's one of Rome's worst defeats, and it is led by a man named Arminius, born of the Carusi tribe, trained by Rome, but loyal to his people. They know this forest. They vanish into it like smoke. And when the battle ends, Rome retreats. For centuries, the Rhine becomes a rough border. South of Itraman towns, baths, villas. North of Germanic tribes, wooden halls, sacred groves. But there is mixing. Some Germanic warriors serve in Roman legions. Others trade amber and furs for glass and wine. Slowly, languages intertwine. Ideas mingle. Gods meet new names. Time passes. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, the world begins to change again. The Roman Empire, once strong and wide as the sea, begins to strain at its edges. From the east, new tribes press westward, the Huns, fierce and fast, displacing others in their wake. The Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, and Lombards, all Germanic peoples, migrate into Roman lands, seeking shelter, land, or conquest. Some sack cities, others settle. In 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire falls. But Germany is not yet born. Not even close. Instead, the land becomes a patchwork of kingdoms. The Franks sunder, Clovis rise in the west and begin to shape what will become France. In the east, the Lombards settle in Italy. The Saxons grow powerful in the north, the Bavarians in the south. And in the middle of it, all still forests, still rivers, still villages where firelight flickers against carved wooden beams. By the 8th century, a new figure begins to loom across the landscape. Charlemagne Karl der Grosse, king of the Franks, and soon emperor. But that part of the story will come next. The rise of Charlemagne marks a turning point, not just for the Germanic tribes, but for all of medieval Europe. Crowned emperor in the year 800 by the Pope in Rome, Charlemagne envisioned a unified Christian empire, a revival of Roman glory, stitched together not by marble roads or Latin law, but by faith, conquest, and education. His empire, though centered in modern-day France, stretched deep into what we now call Germany. He subdued the Saxons brutally, at times forcing conversion through sword and scripture. The forests of the north, once echoing with pagan chants, now heard the bells of wooden churches. Latin prayers replaced tribal songs, yet beneath the surface, the old ways lingered in quiet corners of belief and folklore. Charlemagne did more than expand borders. He brought schools into monasteries, encouraged copying of ancient texts, and preserved knowledge at a time when so much of Europe was slipping into illiteracy and fear. His capital at Aachen now in western Germany became a beacon of learning and architecture. Bathhouses, libraries, and palaces emerged, modeled after Roman ideals but shaped by Germanic hands. The blend of cultures was imperfect, often uneasy, but it laid foundations. When Charlemagne died in 814, his grand empire splintered under his heirs. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 divided it among his grandsons, creating 3 zones: West Francia, the root of modern France; East Francia, the root of Germany; and Middle Francia, a contested strip that would forever shift and bleed. In East Francia, a patchwork of duchies and tribal regions emerge: Saxony, Bavaria, Swabia, Franconia, and Lotharingia, with its own rulers, armies, and ambitions. It was not yet Germany as we know it, but the outlines were forming. Throughout the 10th and 11th centuries, kings of East Francia began to style themselves as emperors, not just of a kingdom, but of a Holy Roman Empire. Otto I, crowned in 962, formalized this identity. He defeated the Magyars' centralized authority and established a new imperial order that drew legitimacy not just from bloodlines, but from the Church in Rome. This began what would become one of the longest-running institutions in European history, the Holy Roman Empire, which, despite its name, was neither truly holy nor Roman nor an empire, but it endured. From the 11th through 13th centuries, the Holy Roman Empire sprawled across Central Europe, including much of modern-day Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic. It was a mosaic of principalities, city-states, bishoprics, and free cities with its own coins, laws, and dialects. The emperor was elected by powerful nobles prince-electors. His power was constantly negotiated, never absolute. Germany, as a result, remained decentralized. Unlike France or England, where monarchs grew increasingly powerful, The German lands became a tangle of alliances, feuds, and local loyalties. Yet, out of this fragmentation came culture. Romanesque cathedrals rose from stone, and later, Gothic spires pierced the sky. Towns like Nuremberg, Regensburg, and Lübeck flourished as centers of trade and craftsmanship. The Hanseatic Liga Confederation of merchant cities connected northern German ports with the Baltic and North Seas, trading salt, furs, beer, and grain. Meanwhile, German monasteries preserved not just scripture, but history, astronomy, and botany. Music echoed through cloisters. Illuminated manuscripts gleamed with gold. And in rural villages, the rhythms of the old world planting by moonlight. Midsummer fires and harvest festivals continued. The Crusades also left their mark. While German knights ventured east, many returned with tales, relics, and new ideas. Some, like the Teutonic Knights, carved out crusader states along the Baltic coast, introducing Christianity, often violently, to pagan lands. Others brought back scientific instruments, exotic spices, and even architectural styles. Pilgrimages, relic cults, and Marian shrines multiplied across German territories. Weaving faith into everyday life with fervent texture. But even as the cross loomed large, tensions grew between emperors and popes. Especially during the investiture, controversia, power struggle over who had the right to appoint bishops. This struggle revealed the fragile balance of spiritual and secular power, and it foreshadowed deeper fractures yet to come. In the background, ordinary people toiled. Serfs harvested rye and oats, blacksmiths shaped iron tools, and midwives whispered prayers over newborns in candlelit cottages. Life was often short, and the church stood at the center of it, baptizing, marrying, burying, and teaching that suffering was the path to salvation. As the 14th century approached, shadows deepened. The Black Death swept through German cities and villages, killing a third of the population. Entire towns were silenced. Trade halted. Fields went unharvested. And in the panic, scapegoats were sought. Jews, in particular, faced violent pogroms, falsely blamed for poisoning wells or bringing the plague. It was a time of fear and superstition, but also strange beauty. The Danse Macabre appeared in art and murals, reminding viewers that death spared no one, not kings, not peasants. Amid this suffering, a quiet question began to stir in hearts and monasteries alike. What if the church had lost its way? That question would ignite a fire soon enough. But for now, the bells still rang, the forests still whispered, and the patchwork that would one day become Germany slept beneath the stars. The 15th century in the German lands was a time of slow churning of wheels turning in monasteries, of coins clinking in merchant towns, and of ideas beginning to stir beneath the surface like underground springs. Though the Holy Roman Empire remained a patchwork, it hummed with movement. In the north, the Hanseatic League reached its Pica network of over 200 towns, and cities stretching from Hamburg to Riga all bound together by trade, treaties, and shared sea winds. Ships carved through the Baltic mist, their sails heavy with grain, honey, furs, amber, and beer. In these ports, Germanic tongues mingled with Dutch, Norse, and Slavic dialects, and the clatter of dockworkers was matched only by the clinking of guild halls and the scratch of quills on parchment. These were cities of civic pride. Lübeck, the queen of the Hanse, had its own laws, its own navy, and even its own diplomatic weight sending envoys to kings and czars. In Nuremberg, craftsmen built intricate astrolabes and clocks that ticked with the patience of stars. Frankfurt held mighty trade fairs that drew merchants from Italy, Poland, France. Even in landlocked towns, prosperity grew like ivy, and in the great Gothic cathedrals of Cologne and Ulm, stone continued to rise. Toward heaven every chisel, stroke, a whispered prayer. Yet not all was peace. Feuds flared between nobles and cities, bishops and peasants, and deeper still, a quiet rot festered in the authority of the church. Bishops lived like princes, cloaked in velvet and gold. Indulgences payments for the forgiveness of sins flowed like coin through cathedral treasuries. Beneath stained glass and incense, doubt was growing. Whispers passed in taverns and candlelit studies. What if grace couldn't be bought? Amid these murmurs, a quiet revolution was born not with fire, but with ink. In 1440, in the town of Mainz, Johannes Gutenberg completed his printing press, movable type, a simple ideal letters that could be rearranged, set in metal, inked, and pressed onto pages with perfect repetition. No more copying by hand. No more monks hunched in scriptoria. The age of the printed word had arrived, and Germany was its cradle. The Gutenberg Bible was printed, first majestic, black-lettered, holy. But soon, the presses buzzed with more than scripture, pamphlets, essays, fables, songs, books in German, books for the common man. Knowledge, once hoarded by the elite, began to trickle outward like dawn light through shutters. And one day, it would pour. In 1517, in the small town of Wittenberg, a monk named Martin Luther posted 95 theses to a church door. He did not shout. He did not carry a torch. He nailed parchment. A soft rustle, a wooden knockhand, history shifted. Luther questioned the sale of indulgences. Yes, but more than that, he questioned the structure of power itself. He spoke of a direct relationship with God, of scripture in one's own language, of the soul's freedom beyond papal control. The printing press made his words fly faster than any army. Within weeks, his ideas spread through cities and across borders. Within months, he was summoned to answer for them. At the Diet of Worms in 1521, when asked to recant, Luther said softly, "Here I stand. I can do no other." Whether those exact words were spoken or later polished, the sentiment echoed across centuries. Germany fractured. Some princes embraced Luther's reforms, seizing church lands, installing Protestant pastors, breaking centuries of Catholic tradition. Others remained loyal to Rome. Civil wars broke out. Peasants, inspired by talk of freedom, revolted in 1520 for demanding not just religious reform, but social justice. But Luther, fearing chaos, sided with the princes, and the revolt was crushed. Fields were burned, villages silenced. Out of this storm, a new Germany began to take shape. Lutheranism became dominant in the north. Catholicism held in the south. The Holy Roman Empire, already a mosaic, was now divided by faith as well. For over 100 years, this uneasy balance held. In some towns, churches stood side by side, one with Latin chants, the other with German hymns. In others, crosses were smashed, frescoes painted over, organs silenced. The 16th century also brought reform of a different kind: music, art, science. In Saxony, the composer Heinrich Schütz whispered sacred motets that would echo in Bach's work a century later. In the realm of maps and machines, German thinkers contributed to early astronomy, cartography, and metallurgy. The Renaissance had reached German soil, but it wore darker, hue-somber woodcuts, brooding theology, and sharp lines etched into copper. And all the while, the empire held barely. Now, as we drift gently into the 17th century, the clouds gather once more. The Reformation was not finished, and the storm to come would shake every city, field, and forest from the Alps to the North Sea. The year is 1618. The air in Prague is brittle with tension. Inside the Bohemian chancellery, Protestant nobles confront Catholic imperial emissaries. A disagreement about religion, about sovereignty, about fear. Words sharpen, tempers rise. Then, suddenly, bodies fly. The defenestration of Prague. 2 Catholic officials hurled from a window into a pile of manure. Miraculously unhurt, but the gesture echoes far louder than the landing. It's the spark. And soon, the forested heart of Europe is aflame. The 30 Years' War begins not with armies, but with mistrust. At first, it's a local dispute: Protestant Bohemia resisting the Catholic Habsburg Emperor. But the fire spreads. Saxony, Bavaria, Spain, Sweden, France, all are drawn in. Soldiers tramp through wheat fields, raping, looting, burning. Towns are emptied. Entire regions starve. Villages vanish from maps. In some parts of Germany, 2/3 of the population die not just from swords, but from famine, plague, exposure. Battlefields blur into fog and ash. At Breitenfeld, at Lutzen, at Ntd-Ling, armies clash under gray skies and trembling banners. The Swedish king, Gustavus Adolphus, dies in the mud. The Catholic general Wallenstein is assassinated by his own. There is no victor, only survivors. And through it all, the empire weakens. The patchwork of German principalities, once bound by culture and languages, now held together only by exhaustion. In 1648, the Peace of Westphalia ends the war. It's not triumph, but permission to stop bleeding. The treaty formalizes what reality already showed. Germany is not one country, but many. Princes may choose their faith, Catholic, Lutheran, or Calvinist. The emperor remains, but only as a symbol. Yet, even amid devastation, quiet resilience pulses. In battered towns, the arts still whisper. Heinrich Schütz composes music of such tender sorrow, it seems to weep with the land. Baroque architecture resides a strange beauty born from grief. And slowly, from the smoking ruin of war, reason begins to glow. The Enlightenment dawns, not with trumpets, but with quills. In Leipzig, Halle, Kingsburg, ideas take root. Scholars like Leibniz dream of universal languages and binary systems. Christian Wolff writes of logic, of ethics, of the rational soul. And in Kingsburg, a man named Immanuel Kant will eventually ask what it means to think freely, to dare to know. But before Kant, there is Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, born in Eisenach in 1685, grows into a composer whose music feels like the architecture of the divine. In Leipzig, he weaves counterpoint so precise, so full of mathematical grace and spiritual yearning, that his fugues become like cathedrals in sound. Organs thunder, and violins sigh. His work, dense yet clear, lifts weary hearts proof that order and emotion can dance. Cool, while Bach writes in German churches, princes debate philosophy in candlelit courts. The Elector of Brandenburg welcomes Enlightenment thinkers. Frederick the Great, flautist and military tactician, invites Voltaire to his palace at Sanssouci. Ideas swirl in salons about government, tolerance, the nature of man. For a time, it seems reason might rule. But enlightenment in Germany is uneven. Peasants remain shackled to lords. Jewish communities still face ghetto walls and cruel laws. Women write like Sophie von La Roche, but their voices struggle to be heard. And the empire, though cultured, is fractured, still over 300 independent territories, each with its own currency, army, and law. Yet beneath the surface, something stirs. The 18th century ends with a whisper from France, then a roar, revolution, then Napoleon. And soon, the German lands will be swept into the storm. The French Revolution cracked the silence of Europe like thunder, and in its wake came a man, crowned not by divine right, but by ambition, Napoleon Bonaparte. At first, German rulers watched from behind their fractured borders, unsure. But soon, Napoleon crossed the Rhine, and everything changed. In 1806, the ancient Holy Roman Empire, founded in 962, was dissolved. It did not fall with blood, but with paper. Emperor Francis II stepped down, and with him faded 1,000 years of imperial pretense. In its place, Napoleon organized the Confederation of the Rhine cluster of German states under French influence. Borders blurred, kings bowed. Reforms swept in. Serfdom abolished in some places. New legal codes introduced. Many welcomed modernization. Others chafed under foreign rule. Prussia, humiliated at Jena and Arstedt, began to reform. Hardened by loss, it embraced meritocracy in its military. education in its bureaucracy. Meanwhile, Austria plotted, lost, and regrouped. But for ordinary Germans, the wars were a storm rolling across Saxony, Bavaria, Hesse. Soldiers slept in fields. Families fled burning towns. Taxes rose. Sons disappeared into distant campaigns. Yet, amid the chaos, something subtle stirred. Nationalism. Poets, historians, and philosophers began speaking of a shared German soul, not just in language, but in spirit. In the forests, the legends, the music, the Brothers Grimm began collecting folk tales, not just for children, but as cultural preservation. And in music halls, Ludwig van Beethoven's symphonies thundered with emotion, revolution, and longing for liberty. By 1813, the tide turned. At Leipzig, in the Battle of Nations, German troops fought not for Napoleon, but against him. It was one of the largest battles in European history. Smoke choked the air, cannons roared, and when it ended, Napoleon began his long retreat. After Waterloo in 1815, the Congress of Vienna reshaped Europe. Germany would not be united, but contained. In place of empire, the German Confederation was born. 39 sovereign states bound in a loose alliance, headquartered in Frankfurt. It was cooperation without cohesion, a structure designed to prevent revolution, not encourage unity. Still, ideas spread. Romanticism bloomed like wildflowers. Painters captured misty castles and ruined cathedrals. Writers like Novalis, Hölderlin, and Heinrich Heine infused prose with longing and melancholy. Nature was not backdrop, but soul. Forests held memory. Rivers whispered old truths. And beneath the dreamy words, pressure built. Economic changes arrived quietly but surely. The Zollverein, a customs union formed in 1834, allowed for free trade across many German states, excluding Austria. It wasn't political unity, but economic unity, and that mattered. Railroads linked cities. Telegraph lines carried news. A middle class grew, educated, restless, ambitious. They wanted more. By 1848, revolution stirred again, not just in France, but across Europe. In Berlin, Frankfurt, Vienna, crowds marched. Students wrote manifestos. Workers demanded rights. Farmers hoped for land. The dream of a united, liberal Germany rose like steam from cobbled streets. The Frankfurt Parliament, a remarkable gathering of thinkers and reformers, met to write a constitution. They debated monarchy versus republic, centralized versus federal. They offered the crown of a united Germany to King Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia. He refused, not because he didn't want power, but because he would not accept a crown from the gutter, as he called it. The revolution faltered. Armies returned. Order was restored. But the dream did not die. It simply waited gathering in the minds of iron-willed men behind factory smoke and university walls. Germany would unite, but not with parchment or poetry. The year is 1862. In a high-ceilinged hall in Berlin, footsteps echo. A man with a bristling mustache and heavy presence rises to speak before the Prussian assembly. His words are calm but stern. The great questions of our day, he says, will not be decided by speeches and majority votes, but by iron and blood. His name, Otto von Bismarck. And with those words, a new chapter begins. Bismarck, sharp, calculating, and deeply loyal to the Prussian monarch, did not dream of unity out of romance or revolution. He believed in strength. Prussia would not dissolve into some pan-German ideal. Instead, Germany would rise around Prussia, forged not in debate, but in war. The strategy began with Denmark. In 1864, Prussia and Austria joined forces to assert control over the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. The war was swift and victory shared. But alliances, like embers, can be stirred into flames. In 1866, Bismarck provoked Austria into conflict over control of the spoils. The 7 Weeks' War followed, lightning fast, deadly, efficient, and decisively in Prussia's favor. Austria was expelled from German affairs, and from its ashes, Bismarck shaped the North German Confederation, a new structure with Prussia at its heart. Efficient and modern, its legal code sleek like machinery. Southern states, Catholic and cautious, remained aloof. But the clock ticked forward. The spark for full unification came, ironically, from abroad. In 1870, a crisis over the Spanish throne spiraled into the Franco-Prussian War. Bismarck, ever the master of manipulation, released the famous EMS dispatcher subtly edited telegram that humiliated France and enraged Napoleon III. The war that followed united Germans like never before. Volunteers poured in, flags waved, battles erupted from Alsace to Sedan. In one decisive moment, Napoleon III was captured and Paris besieged. French surrender came not just in defeat, but humiliation. And then, in a gleaming hall at Versailles, within the very palace of French, kings German, princes, and generals gathered under painted ceilings and golden light. On January 18th, 1871, the King of Prussia was declared. Kaiser Wilhelm I Germany was born as an empire not in its own land, but in the heart of its rival. A symbolic twist, sharp and unforgettable. The new German Empire was a federation of kingdoms, duchies, and free cities. But in practice, it was Bismarck's machine. He remained chancellor, guiding policy with a firm but unseen hand. He shaped alliances, silenced Catholics through the Kulturkampf, and suppressed socialists, even while introducing social insurance, the first of its kind in the world. And yet, for all its rigidity, the empire hummed with change. Factories roared. Cities swelled. Steel and coal became cornerstones of power. Trains stitched the land together. Universities flourished. Science and engineering boomed. Germany became the birthplace of aspirin, the home of chemical dyes, the cutting edge of physics. And in coffee houses and salons, new ideas brewed. Nietzsche wrote with fire. Wagner composed storms. Expression simmered behind the order. But beneath the polished surface, tension grew. Prussia dominated the Reichstag. Minorities bristled. Workers marched. And abroad, the empire looked out with hungry eyes. Africa, China, the Pacific Germany sought colonies, markets, status. The sun rarely set on the British Empire, but Berlin wanted a glint of that light, too. In 1888, the old Kaiser Wilhelm died. His son ruled briefly. And then came Wilhelm, the second, young, brash, and impatient. Bismarck resigned. The Iron Chancellor's long shadow faded. The new emperor favored prestige over prudence, and the world listened. Because Europe was changing. Alliances hardened, armies grew. The stage was being set, not for dreams, but for catastrophe. You're safe now. The lamps are low. The world outside has hushed into darkness, and within this quiet, we drift back to a time of creaking. Telegraphs whispered fears in candlelit halls, and train cars rumbling toward borders as tension brewed like a storm behind the curtain. It is the summer of 1914. Germany stands tall, young empire, full of confidence and steel. The streets of Berlin buzz with trams and typewriters, soldiers in polished boots, scholars debating beneath gaslight, and factories echoing with the clang of engines. But across Europe, the air feels taut, as if something unseen is about to snap. The spark came far from German soil. In Sarajevo, an archduke is shot. Austria-Hungary points its finger at Serbia. Russia rises in Serbia's defense, and in the intricate web of treaties and rivalries. Germany steps forward to support Austria, convinced the war will be short and victorious. The Kaiser declares a defensive war. Crowds cheer. Roses are thrown. Soldiers board trains, believing they'll be home by Christmas. But what follows is mud, silence, and years of death. Germany's Schlieffen-Planen ambitious sweep through neutral Belgium into France brings swift condemnation. Britain enters the war. The Western Front solidifies into a scar across northern France. Trenches stretch like veins carved into the earth, filled with rats, gas, and the quiet horror of waiting. The Eastern Front, though less static, is no less brutal. German armies face the vastness of Russia. Victories like Tannenberg are overshadowed by the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion of fighting on two fronts. At home, Germany mobilizes not just its armies, but its people. Women take to the factories. Rations are introduced. Soap and sugar become rare. The economy bends. A generation grows up in the shadow of ration cards and newspaper obituaries. The hunger winter of 1916-1917 brings turnips in place of bread. And still, the war drags on. By 1917, hope dims. The United States enters the war. The Russian Empire collapses, offering Germany a brief glimpse of victory in the East. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk gives Germany vast lands, but little comfort. Resources are stretched thin. Morale fractures. Protests echo in the streets. Revolution stirs in whispers. And then, in 1918, a final gamble. The spring offensive surges forward. German troops push through the Western Front with desperate speed. Paris is within reach, but supply lines crumble. Exhaustion bleeds into every trench. The Allies counterattack. The German line collapses. Back home, mutiny spreads. Sailors refuse orders. Workers strike. The Kaiser flees to the Netherlands. On November 11th, 1918, the armistice is signed. The war ends not with triumph, but with a silence so deep it echoes through every corner of the Reich. Nearly 2 million German soldiers have died. Cities mourn, and as the dust settles, a republic rises from the ruins, gasping in the light of a peace it never truly chose. But that peace, shaped at Versailles, comes with thorns. Germany is blamed. Reparations are demanded. Colonies are stripped away. The army is neutered. The economy kneels under impossible debt. And the people, ready-wary, begin to burn with something colder than anger. Humiliation. It seeps into newspapers, conversations, classrooms. It wraps itself around the dreams of the young, the broken, the unemployed. And somewhere, in the soft shadow of defeat, something else begins to grow. The lamps are dim now. The streets are quieter than they've ever been. Cobblestones glisten with rain, and the newspaper boys no longer shout with pride. It is 1919 in Germany, and the war is over, but the wounds are wide open. The Weimar Republic, born not from victory, but from necessity, struggles to breathe in a house that still smells of smoke. Its walls cracked by revolution. Its ceilings bowed beneath the weight of loss. Intellectuals whisper of democracy, freedom, modern art, and strange new sciences. But just beyond the candlelight, men with broken metals sell pencils in the street. The economy teeters, staggering under the burden of reparations. Hyperinflation arrives, like a fever marks, become worthless. In 1923, a loaf of bread costs billions. Children play with stacks of money instead of blocks. People carry wages in baskets only to watch them devalue by evening. It's surreal, absurd, and humiliating. Meanwhile, across Munich's smoky beer halls, another kind of voice begins to rise, not academic, not poetic, but sharp, bitter, calculated. A veteran with a small mustache and a loud certainty. Adolf Hitler. He speaks not of peace, but of revenge. He blames the treaty, the politicians, the Jews. He calls the Weimar government weak, corrupt, un-German. His words are magnetic. Some laugh, some cheer, most just listen. In 1923, he tries to seize power the failed beer hall, Putsch. He is jailed. And in that silence, he writes Mein Kampf, a blueprint not of governance, but of domination. When he leaves prison, the country has changed. The economy recovers briefly. The golden age of the Weimar glows bow, house, design, cabarets, jazz, but it is fragile. Then comes the Wall Street crash of 1929, and Germany falls again deeper, harder. Unemployment soars. Faith in democracy fades. And in that desperate, quiet, Hitler's party, the National Socialist, rises. Not with a revolution, but with elections, with promises, with scapegoats. They speak of purity, strength, and unity, of restoring German greatness. They offer a single, clean story in a time of chaos. In 1933, he is named Chancellor. Many still believe he can be controlled. A tool, a figurehead, but the Reichstag burns. Emergency powers are granted. The Constitution is suspended. And within months, Germany becomes something else entirely. Books are burned in public squares, flames licking the night sky. Professors are silenced, journalists arrested. Jewish shops are boycotted. Laws are passed quiet, at first stripping citizenship, banning intermarriage, redefining what it means to be German. The Gestapo is formed. The camps begin. Ordinary people look away. Some support. Some whisper. Some flee. But most adapt. The economy strengthens. Roads are built. Propaganda films flood cinemas. Children join youth movements. Radios hum with the voice of the Führer. And to the world, Germany seems reborn. But beneath the steel and pageantry, darkness churns. Rearmament begins. Austria is absorbed. The Sudetenland is taken. And in the polished halls of diplomacy, the world hesitates. And then, Poland, year 1939. Germany invades, and everything changes. The autumn of 1939 arrived with a silence that felt unnatural, like the moment before a storm. On September 1st, German troops marched into Poland beneath a gray sky. They moved fast, blitzkrieg, lightning war tanks rolling, planes screaming low. Poland fell in weeks. Britain and France declared war. But their armies stood still, as if unsure how to begin the end. In Germany, the air was thick with pride and radio anthems. Rations were introduced. Cities darkened for blackouts. But the Nazi machine moved swiftly, methodically. By the spring of 1940, Denmark and Norway were taken. Then came the shocking fall of France Paris, occupied. It's eerily intact, but watched by foreign boots. Hitler stood before the Eiffel Tower for a photo. The image would haunt the world. Across the English Channel, Britain braced for invasion. The Luftwaffe filled the skies, bombing cities night after night. But Britain held. The Blitz hardened them. And in time, the tide would shift. Back in Germany, the war seemed far away to many at first. Industry boomed, fed by slave labor from occupied territories. Propaganda promised victory, but whispers grew, and some Germans quietly, bravely resisted. The White Rose, a student group, scattered leaflets, a failed plot to assassinate Hitler would come later, but silence was dangerous. Dissent could vanish a family overnight. And in darker corners still, a horror beyond war unfolded. The Holocaust. 6 million Jews, along with Roma, disabled individuals, political prisoners, and others deemed undesirable, rounded up, transported in cattle cars, starved, shot, gassed, burned. The world would not fully grasp it until the camps were opened years later, but the trains ran, the smoke rose, and too many said nothing. Meanwhile, in the East, Hitler turned on Stalin. Operation Barbarossa. The invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 was vast millions of men, thousands of miles, and it was brutal. Entire villages erased, civilians caught in crossfire. The winter came, and the Wehrmacht froze. At Stalingrad, the German advance shattered. A turning point. From there, the retreat began. In North Africa, Rommel battled Allied forces in the sand. In Italy, Mussolini fell. And then, June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. The Western Front was reborn. Germany fought on two sides, now east and west. Cities burned, bridges fell, and the sky was never quiet. By 1945, Berlin was surrounded. Soviet forces closed in from the east, the Allies from the west. On April 30th, in a bunker beneath the ruined city, Hitler took his own life. Days later, Germany surrendered. The war was over, but the silence that followed was heavier than the war drums. Germany lay in ruins, its cities bombed flat, its people broken, its soul hollowed by guilt and grief. Millions dead, millions more displaced, and a legacy of horror that could never be undone. Yet, from that rubble, the story did not end. It only shifted. In May 1945, as the guns fell silent and the smoke began to clear, Germany lay still. Cities once proud now slept under blankets of ash. Berlin, once a vibrant cultural beacon, had become a skeleton of steel and cinders. Across the landscape, churches stood without roofs, trains lay twisted in fields, and silence reigned over towns where voices had once cheered parades. The Allies, America, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union divided what was left. Germany was split into 4 occupation zones, each governed by one of the victors. Berlin, the heart of the fallen Reich, was similarly partitioned. At first, the lines were drawn in ink, but soon they would harden into iron. The war had ended, but peace did not come easily. In the West, the Americans and British spoke of democracy, reconstruction, and economic revival. In the East, under Soviet control, a different vision emerged, one of socialism, central planning, and silent obedience. Refugees streamed across borders. Millions were homeless. Millions more were missing. And beneath it all, the past lingered. Nuremberg trials began, voices shaky, evidence endless. At night, The world listened to the ghosts of the camps speak through photographs, ledgers, and testimonies. Justice was attempted, but trauma is never truly measured in courtrooms. As 1949 dawned, the Cold War crystallized. Two Germanys were born. In the West, the Federal Republic of Germany West, Germany backed by the United States and its allies, capitalist, democratic, rebuilding fast under the Marshall Plan. Its factories roared again. Volkswagen Beetles rolled out. Streets were swept clean. But the past was never far. Many former Nazis still held positions. Healing was uneven. Memory was political. In the East, the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, controlled by the Soviet Union. Its new government promised equality and order. But behind the slogans stood surveillance. The Stasi, East Germany's secret police, recorded whispers, followed footsteps, opened letters. Neighbors were forced to report on neighbors. Dissent was a risk few dared take. And, between them, Berlin. A city cut in half. At first, people could still cross. East to west. West to east. For work, for family, for escape. But that window narrowed. In the 1950s, tens of thousands fled the East. Doctors, engineers, teachers seeking freedom in the West. It was a quiet exodus. Until it became too loud to ignore. In the early hours of August 13, 1961, East German forces unrolled barbed wire across Berlin. Roads were blocked, trains halted, streets divided overnight, and soon concrete followed. The Berlin Wall rose thick and gray, crowned with barbed wire, lined with guard towers, a scar across the city's face. Families split, friends trapped, lovers separated by stone. The wall became the symbol of the Cold War. The world watched, it feared, it wondered when it might fall. But it stood for decades. Meanwhile, life continued. West Germany thrived economically. Economic miracle, powered by industry, innovation, and immigration. Turkish workers arrived in waves. Cities grew modern. The past was debated, never buried. Young students in the 60s protested Vietnam, nuclear arms, and their own parents' wartime silence. In the East, life moved with quiet discipline. There were jobs, housing, even opera and literature, but everything was monitored. Typewriters were registered, telephones tapped. Escape became desperate. Tunnels were dug, balloons sewn from bedsheets. Some made it, some were shot at the wall. The most tragic of them was Peter Fechter, just 18 years old, who bled out on the concrete while guards watched and no one dared move. Yet the world itself was changing, and one day the wall would tremble. The year is 1989, November. The Berlin air is cold, laced with fog and hope. For months, whispers have grown louder. From Leipzig to Prague, from church vigils to silent marches. In East Germany, people gather by candlelight, not to shout, but simply to be seen, to walk, to breathe, to ask for something they had only dared dream: freedom. Behind the wall, cracks appear, not in stone, but in spirit. The Soviet Union, under Mikhail Gorbachev, speaks of glasnost and perestroika openness and reform. But East Germany resists, until it can no longer. On the evening of November 9th, confusion reigns. A spokesman misspeaks on live television. As far as I know, the borders are open, and so people come. First dozens, then hundreds. They walk to the wall, laughing, crying, unsure. And the guards, bewildered, step aside. No bullets, no orders, just silence. Then cheers. People climb the concrete, swing hammers, pass bottles of champagne over the top. Families reunite in the street under floodlights and falling bricks. The Berlin Wall, once a symbol of fear, falls, not with violence, but with human hands. Within a year, Germany is whole again. On October 3rd, 1990, East and West Germany reunite under one flag, one constitution, one quiet breath of relief. The road ahead is not easy. Economic disparities remain. Wounds reopen, but the dream of unity moves forward. In the decades that follow, Germany evolves into one of the world's leading democracies. It becomes a founding voice in the European Union, a steward of remembrance, a land where history is not hidden but taught. Berlin transforms, a grand graffiti blooming on the last fragments of the wall. Clubs thumping beneath Cold War bunkers, museums whispering stories into the ears of the curious. And through it all, Germany remembers the dark, the light, the in-between. It remembers Bach and Buchenwald, Gutenberg and the Gestapo, Luther's quill and the roaring panzers. A people divided, then healed, not perfectly, but persistently. It remembers not to glorify, but to understand, not to forget, but to promise never again. Today, you can walk through the Brandenburg Gate and hear only footsteps. You can stand on cobbled streets where emperors once rode and see schoolchildren laughing. You can sit in a quiet forest where Romans once marched and hear nothing but leaves. Germany lives, not only in monuments, but in memory. And as the night deepens, as the story fades, you're left with only the soft hum of centuries behind you, and the breath of history still gently whispering forward. The night is calm again. The pages have turned through millennia, and now we find ourselves in the soft glow of more familiar years, where satellite signals cross the sky and autobahns hum beneath headlights. Germany, unified now for over a decade, moves forward with measured grace, its identity slowly reshaped by memory, innovation, and reflection. The silence of the Cold War fades into the buzz of reunified cities. And a new generation, born after the wall, rises without its shadow. Berlin pulses like a second heart, reborn from rubble, threaded with trams and voices. Artists fill Kreuzberg warehouses. Startups light up MIT. The Reichstag's glass dome curves gently into the sky, symbol of transparency over the halls once cloaked in smoke and command. Here, chancellors now walk with the weight of history and the vision of a changing Europe. Angela Merkel, a physicist from East Germany, quietly rises to lead the country from 2005 to 2021, the first woman to do so. With her calm voice and scientific precision, she guides the nation through storms, both financial and viral. Under her leadership, Germany weathers the Eurozone crisis, supports green energy transitions, and opens its doors in 2015 to nearly 1 million refugees fleeing conflict in Syria. Decision met with both applause and anxiety, hope and challenge. But before that moment of migration and mercy, there is healing still to be done. In the early 2000s, Germany looks inward, rebuilding not only its infrastructure, but its soul. New museums, open memorials to the murdered Jews of Europe, to the persecuted Roma and Sinti, to the silenced and forgotten. Streets, once renamed for emperors, now honor resistance fighters. Students learn about Kristallnacht with quiet reverence. Survivors speak softly in classrooms, their memories preserved like amber in the minds of children who will grow up not to repeat, but to remember. The economy hums in rhythms of precision, B, Siemens, SAP, but in quiet towns, still close early. Churches toll the hour, and forest trails stretch behind villages where time seems to settle. Here, in the silence of southern Bavaria or the breezes along the Baltic coast, the past still lingers. Cobblestones still remember horse hooves, and locals sip dark coffee while discussing Beethoven, the Bundesliga, and budget reforms. The European Union binds Germany to its neighbors not with chains, but with shared treaties and trains. The Schengen Agreement dissolves borders, the euro links pockets. Yet, the country remains watchful, balancing its growing influence with cautious restraint. German troops serve abroad, now peacekeeping in Kosovo, training in Mali, supporting NATO. But each deployment is debated, each commitment weighed with the memory of a militarism once unleashed. Technology rises gently like steam. In Leipzig, 3D printers hum alongside Gothic spires. In Munich, autonomous vehicles are tested under soft spring rain. And in classrooms, digital blackboards glow where chalk once scratched dates of emperors. The energument Germany's ambitious transition from nuclear and coal to wind and solar transforms landscapes. Giant turbines spin in northern fields, and solar panels glint across rooftops like silver scales. The last nuclear plants close in 2023. The future is electric, efficient, and ideal like green. But the road is not smooth. Political shifts murmur beneath the surface. New parties emerge. The alternative, für Deutschland, AfD, enters the Bundestag, stirring debates over immigration, identity, and belonging. Protests rise and fall like tides. Some wave rainbow flags, others hold banners of anger. Yet, through this, Germany's democracy holds firm, tested, but not broken. And then, silence. streets empty, windows light with candles. In 2020, the world pauses. A virus spreads. COVID-19 brings a new kind of war fought, not with bullets, but with masks, policies, and patience. Germany, with its robust healthcare system, fares better than some, but not without loss. Elderly voices fade. Shops close. Schools flicker to screens. Merkel addresses the nation not as a ruler, but as a mother of reason. Her words are calm, clear, careful. Ease ist earns, she says. It is serious, and the people listen. Vaccines arrive. Spring returns. The nation exhales. By 2022, the world reopens. Yet, Germany, like all, its change more digital, more remote, but also more reflective. In the Bundestag, a new chancellor resolves. He inherits a country stable, yet alert. Inflation ticks. War returns to Europe in 2022, not in Germany, but just beyond, in Ukraine. Refugees come once more. History echoes again through tanks, diplomacy, and frozen winters. Germany responds, not with silence, but support, weapons, funds, shelter. The burden of history guides a new responsibility. As 2025 unfolds, Germany stands not as a relic, but as a rhythm. A nation of thinkers and builders, poets and engineers. Its past is not forgotten, it is woven into quiet corners of cities, into lullabies and law books, into the firm handshake of diplomacy and the soft notes of Bach played in candlelit halls. Its future is not fixed, but carefully imagined. By youth on climate marches, by scientists in labs. Under branches as old as legends, the wind still moves softly, carrying Latin echoes, medieval prayers, industrial whispers, and the faint, hopeful murmur of peace. The journey is never finished, the history never still, but tonight it rests, and so can you.